When it comes to religious texts, skeptics often highlight perceived contradictions as proof that these writings can't be trusted. Shaykh Uthman, a prominent Muslim apologist, frequently points to passages in the Old Testament that seem at first glance to be inconsistent. In this video, we'll take a closer look at some of his most common challenges and explore how these supposed contradictions can be understood within the context of biblical theology, history, and language. Moreover, I'll provide the underlying logical fallacy of each of his arguments. Let's dive into these issues and see why they don't dismantle the Bible's reliability, but instead reveal a deeper narrative at play. Here are a few specific examples he might bring up. Number 1. The creation account in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2. Uthman frequently points out what he believes are contradictions between the two creation narratives. In Genesis 1, it describes the creation of the world in 6 days, with plants created on the 3rd day, animals on the 5th, and humans on the 6th. In Genesis 2, however, it seems to depict human beings being created before plants and animals. So Uthman might ask, how can these two chapters both be true when the order of creation is different? Well, there's actually a simple answer for it. You see, the two accounts serve different purposes and perspectives. Genesis 1 provides a cosmic chronological overview of creation, while Genesis 2 focuses on the specific details of humanity's creation in relation to God. Genesis 2 is not intended to contradict the sequence, but to zoom in on the role of man and woman in the created world. The focus on Adam's role in tending the Garden of Eden before plants are mentioned relates specifically to cultivated plants, not wild vegetation, which was created earlier in Genesis 1. By the way, the fallacy he's committing is called false dichotomy. You see, Uthman assumes that Genesis 1 and 2 must be in contradiction, forcing the interpretation that they cannot be complementary. He presents only two options: either they are literal sequences or they are contradictory, without considering a third possibility, that the two chapters serve different itinerary and theological purposes. For example, the cosmic overview versus human-centric narrative. Number 2. The age of Ahaziah at ascension. You see, in the second book of Kings, Ahaziah is said to be 22 years old when he began to reign. However, in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 22, he is listed as 42 years old. Uthman uses this discrepancy to question the textual reliability of the Old Testament. So he might ask someone, how can Christians claim the Bible is perfect when there are clear contradictions like the age of Ahaziah? Well, again, the answer is pretty simple. The discrepancy in the age of Ahaziah is generally seen as a copyist error in Chronicles. Most Bible scholars agree that Ahaziah could not have been 42 since his father, Jehoram, died at the age of 40. Ancient manuscripts, including the Septuagint and Syriac versions, list Ahaziah's age as 22 in both cases. While copyist errors do occur in transmitted manuscripts, they do not affect the theological truths or core doctrines of the Bible. So, your answer could be quite simple. That's right. There could be some minor copying errors in the Bible, and that's okay. You see, the fallacy he's committing is hasty generalization. By focusing on a copyist error in one specific instance, Uthman generalizes that this single error discredits the entire Bible. He assumes that if one textual discrepancy exists, the entire biblical text must be unreliable, which is an overreach and doesn't account for the fact that minor copyist errors are common in ancient manuscripts and don't affect the core theological truths. And by the way, a simple response you might give him is, would you have preferred that the Bible writers did exactly what the third caliph, coincidentally, whose name was Uthman, did, primarily that he ordered any version or fragments that differed from the standardized assembly of the Quran to be burned? Or would you prefer the honesty and having some copyist error? You see, there's a clear double standard. Number 3, the census of Israel. The book of Numbers versus the book of Chronicles. Uthman often references the differences between the census in Numbers chapter 1 and 1 Chronicles chapter 21. For instance, in Numbers, the total count for the Israelites is different from the count in Chronicles. This is used to question the consistency of the Bible. So he might ask, why do these two accounts of the same census differ in their numbers if the Bible is supposed to be without error? Well, again, the response is quite simple. The census in Numbers chapter 1 and 1 Chronicles chapter 21 are not addressing the same event. Numbers refers to a census taken early during Israel's wilderness journey, whereas Chronicles refers to a different event, much later in David's reign. The difference in numbers could also, by the way, reflect different methods of counting, for example, different age groups or military eligibility. And he's committing the fallacy of equivocation. Uthman conflates two different events, the census in Numbers and the census in Chronicles, as if they're the same event, thus creating a false contradiction during his presentation to passerbys. This is a form of equivocation where two different situations are presented as identical to imply inconsistency. Number 4. David's census, God versus Satan. You see, in 2 Samuel chapter 24, it says God incited David to take a census of Israel, while in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, it says Satan incited David. Uthman might ask, how can God and Satan both be responsible for the same act? Isn't this a contradiction? Well, both accounts can be reconciled by understanding that God sometimes allows Satan to act as an agent of testing or judgment. In 2 Samuel, God permits the census as a form of divine judgment against Israel, which, by the way, had already incurred God's displeasure. But in 1 Chronicles, it highlights Satan's role as the immediate instigator of David's sinful action. This fits the biblical theme perfectly, where God can permit human actions or satanic influences for his greater purpose. Similar to the story of Job. By the way, the fallacy here is called a false dilemma, or the either-or fallacy. Uthman assumes that either God or Satan must have incited David, without considering the more nuanced possibility that God can allow Satan to act in certain situations. This false dilemma limits the options to only two mutually exclusive interpretations, whereas Christian theology allows for more complexity in understanding divine permission. Number 5. How did Saul die? The death of King Saul is recounted differently in the first book of Samuel, chapter 31, and 2 Samuel, chapter 1. In 1 Samuel, Saul takes his own life by falling on his sword, but in 2 Samuel, an Amalekite claims to have killed Saul at his request. Uthman points to this as a clear contradiction, so he might ask, which account of Saul's death is true? How can both of these be in the same Bible? Well, the accounts offer complementary perspectives. In 1 Samuel, it provides the historical fact that Saul fell on his own sword and died. And 2 Samuel recounts the Amalekites' claim to have killed Saul, likely in a bid to gain favor with David. However, David does not believe him, as shown by his severe punishment of the Amalekite. The Amalekite story is likely a fabrication intended to win David's favor, rather than an actual account of Saul's death. You see, the fallacy here is appeal to ignorance. Uthman assumes a contradiction based on incomplete or misunderstood information. He presents the Amalekites' claim in 2 Samuel as fact, without considering that the Amalekite might have been lying for personal gain. This is an appeal to ignorance, assuming that because one doesn't have the full context, the text must contradict. We've only touched the surface, but after examining Shaykh Uthman's challenges, it's clear that many of these so-called contradictions stem from misunderstandings of the text's context, purpose, or language, rather than proving the Bible's inerrancy to be false. These examples actually highlight the depth and complexity of Scripture. When we dig deeper, we see how the Bible's truth remains intact, even when skeptics attempt to sow doubt. In the end, these challenges invite us to study the Bible more thoroughly, reinforcing our faith and understanding rather than diminishing it. If you would like more videos on responses to Uthman's objections or any other Muslim apologists or any other apologist in any religion or worldview for that matter, please say so in the comments below. And please, the best thing you can do to support this ministry is share this video.